Welcome to Fun and Games Side Quests. Every episode is a different host sharing a video game they love and why they love it.
Hi, my name is John Learned. I'm a sometimes freelance video game writer with work on Kotaku, on Wired, on US Gamer, may it rest in peace. I'm a sometimes YouTube video producer. You can find my stuff if you search for me or the annotated Third Strike or the annotated Symphony of the Night on YouTube, and sometimes lunchtime streamer. And I love Third Strike. I love it, I love it, I love it. It's a great video game. And by that, I mean Street Fighter III Third Strike, which came out in 1999. Produced by Capcom. It is now sort of a legendary video game that we all sort of look to as maybe the greatest fighting game of all time. And your mileage on that is going to vary, but for me, it is certainly the greatest fighting game of all time. And, you know, depending on when you ask, could be the only video game that ever really mattered? Probably not, but let me convince you anyway. So, like I said, Third Strike came out in 99 and was the second upgrade to Street Fighter III New Generation, which came out in 1997 in arcades. A famous flop because, A, it's almost impossible to follow up, you know, the monumental success of Street Fighter II, one of, you know, obviously one of the greatest games of all time in terms of sales, in terms of cultural impact, but also because the game was famously unfinished, not fun to play, but gorgeous to look at, and we'll come back to that in a second. But Third Strike refines the game in so many ways, and it still has a great feel. And it's hard to sort of sometimes describe what feel is in fighting games, in any video game really. So like when people sort of talk about the gun feel in a Bungie shooter, or the platforming, the jumping in a Mario game, fighting games sort of have that kind of intangible feel to them. And Third Strike feels great. Adjusted to the point where it fixed a lot of the problems that were evident in New Generation and its eventual upgrade, Second Impact. Brought in a giant roster of a bunch of new characters, even though it's by today's standards a game with a small roster. But even though it's also a famously sort of imbalanced game, if you're the kind of person that really wants to dig into deeper systems of fighting games, or really sort of push yourself to get great with one character and then drop that character and move on to somebody else that's equally complex, but on the other end of the fighting game spectrum, like a charging character versus a more zoning character or motion-based character, Third Strike gives you that, even with a small roster. They're all over the place in terms of different play styles. They're all over the place in terms of different things that you can do with them in the game. But if you're not the kind of person that really gets into this stuff, that, you know, really likes to get under the hood of a video game, Third Strike is still just a casually fascinating game to play and to look at. It is easily one of the most beautiful games to come from its period, and I think that even though its lasting legacy for the last few years was how good it looked versus how well it played, Third Strike is sort of one of those pinnacles of old sprite-based 2D animation, and it still looks just gorgeous today. Capcom has come out and talked about the visual fidelity of the game and a lot over the years, with how many frames of animation they put into it, how it runs at 60 frames per second, how it took so much time to animate the characters, which is one of the reasons that New Generation came out so late. But, you know, if you're the kind of person that just likes to watch interesting games and watch people play them, you know, you don't want to play it yourself, but, you know, you're interested in sort of seeing how the things move and really getting some visual fireworks from something. Third Strike has that all day. It's just an absolutely gorgeous game. And because of its complex systems, it's sort of easy to grasp for the layperson that's not into fighting games when something really fascinating happens. And something really exciting happens. And by that, I mean the parry system, which is, at one point, it was maybe one of the game's biggest detriments because people sort of weren't into that when the game was new, and they found it to be very difficult to wrap their head around. And as time went on, we found that the parry system is something that really sort of bred out into other fighting games and other video games too. Other fighting game producers that make games that you've also heard of, like Tekken, like the Guilty Gear guys, they were vocal Third Strike fans when it was in its arcade heyday, especially, you know, obviously in Japan. And you can see their uses of the parry system are obviously sort of taken from what Third Strike had made. So briefly, the parry system is essentially a very subtle risk-reward system in that if an attack is coming your way, you can direct your character into it at basically the last second and they'll swat the attack away. It doesn't matter, almost, with some exceptions, it doesn't matter what it is. Basically, if it's a fireball, if it's a dragon punch, if it's a kick to the face, if you hit forward on the stick just before the attack lands, you'll push it out of the way. If you mistime the forward movement, you're going to walk into damage. If you keep tapping on the stick to go forward, you're going to dash into it. You can do this while jumping. You can do it with low attacks. It's a really interesting way to basically change the psychology of fighting games, which not only does it give you the opportunity to get out of no-win scenarios, but it strikes a certain fear in the opposing player by the different behaviors that you take on. Like, will this person parry this? Will this person throw me because I think that they think that I'm trying to parry too much? It really, really altered the state of how we think of fighting games and how they were played, especially at the time. And getting sort of back to what I was saying earlier, if you're not into fighting games, if you like watching people play video games competitively, it's pretty easy to see that, something really cool is happening because, oh my God, this guy's parrying all of this stuff that this other player is throwing at them. But it's not a get out of jail free card, right? It's not the kind of thing where it will instantly turn the tables of a match. It just gives you, the parrying player, an opportunity to do something else. That could be a damaging combo. That could be getting out of danger. That could be all kinds of different stuff. So it's still the kind of thing where you have to play patiently and think a few moves ahead to really take advantage of. So it's a fascinating mechanic that has gone down in history as helping made this game one of the best of all time. So you can really dig into it. You can learn a bunch of stuff. You can play the game competitively, or you could watch other people play it and still get a lot of enjoyment out of not only how good it looks, but what's happening on screen and how these two people are sort of outthinking each other, or just doing crazy damaging combos after lots of parries, because that's still great to watch, right? It's also a crazy accessible game, and it's the kind of thing that has been re-released a few times. Some versions of it have been better than others, but it's the kind of thing that old players of this game are still absolutely welcoming to new people and really want the scene to continue to grow. You could pay for it if you want to with the Street Fighter 30th anniversary, which is something that I think that people should do because it's a great package. But if you want to play competitively online, you could do it with something like Fightcade, which is free if you're okay with the gray area of emulation. But the game is easily played on a rickety old laptop or a newer PlayStation. It's something that everybody can get their hands on, and it's a scene that is still thriving so many years later. And I think that's one of the other reasons I like it so much. I mean, Third Strike was not a well-received game when it was new. New Generation was a huge flop. Second Impact didn't really make much of an impact, pardon the pun. But Third Strike really sort of courted the hardcore scene that was growing around fighting games, that had grown around fighting games. But it was something of a noble failure, and a lot of people wrote it off. And I think that that's sort of what attracted me to it. And that's something that kind of stuck with me for a long time. And as they kept re-releasing the games, I kept playing them, I kept buying them, but I never really got good at them until finally we had the opportunity to do that with Online Edition, post Street Fighter 4, and now there's all kinds of different ways to play it. And I think that's awesome. I think that the game, because it lingered so long in sort of the background and slowly sort of like moved into its renaissance in modern day, it's a great story. And this is the kind of game that a lot of fighting game players and competitive video game people sort of still compare to chess in that, and forgive me for sounding pretentious, but when you watch The Queen's Gambit on Netflix and people are like, oh, did you read about so-and-so do this move to so-and-so in this match in 1956 or whatever, people talk about Third Strike in those terms. Did you watch Deshiken do this thing to Sugiyama at Co-op Cup in Japan in 2019 and blah, 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 blah. I think that that's awesome. And there's a lot we can sort of go back to, and, there's a lot of tape, there's a lot of film that we can go back to and rewatch and learn from. And there's a lot of old players, old heads that are still around that want to teach new players how to play the game. And that could be you. So play Third Strike. It's a good game. It's one of the best games of all time. It is definitely one of my favorite video games of all time. And I think you'll love it. Thanks a lot. My name again is John Learned. Happy gaming.
Hey there, Screen Beans. Have you heard about Screen Snark?
Rachel, this is an ad break. They aren't Screen Beans until they listen to the show.
Fine. Potential Screen Beans. You like movies and TV shows, right?
I mean, who doesn't? Screen Snark is a casual conversation about the movies and television shows that are shaping us as we live our everyday lives.
That's right, Matt. We have a chat with at least one incredible guest every episode, hailing from all walks. We've interviewed chefs,
writers, costumers, musicians,
yoga teachers, comedians, burlesque dancers,
folks in the film and TV industry,
and more.
We'd be delighted for you to join us every other Monday on the Certain POV Podcast Network.
Or wherever you get your podcasts, fresh and tasty off the presses.
What? That's not...
Can I call them Screen Beans now?
Fine.
Screen Beans!
So tune in and we'll see you at the movies or on a couch somewhere.
'Cause you're all Screen Beans now.
You will be mine.
CPOV. CertainPOV.com.